welcome in mid-April, 4.5 months before round one deadlines, to a series of masterclasses with the expert team at Fortuna Admissions. Today we'll be focusing on round one application strategy and everything that you can do over the next 4 or 5 months across all of the top schools, whether they're top US, Canadian business schools or top schools in Europe and Asia, to really put together the sort of thoughtful and impactful applications. And of course, it's not going to be me that's providing that advice. I've learned to turn to the experts. And I'm joined by my colleagues at Fortuna, Julia Brady, who was the former managing director at Northwestern's Kellogg, and also a former senior associate at UChicago. Caroline Diarte Edwards, who was the former INSEAD director of admissions, also the director of financial aid, and Karla Cohen, the former associate director at Harvard Business School. My background, I write a lot about business education and talk to many, many thousands of applicants to business school every year with Fortuna. I also host the Center Court events with John Byrne and the team at Poets and Quants. So we hope that over the next 60 minutes, we'll be able to take you on that journey and each of the different steps, the sort of introspection and reflection that is required to put together an outstanding application to business school. I mentioned the dream team at Fortuna. I'm blessed to work with over 40 individuals that were actually inside those admissions offices, sitting there looking at all of those applications from this talented bunch of strategy consultants and bankers and private equity associates and digital marketing execs and so on. The sort of conversations about what did we see in this applicant? What was it that really sort of caught our attention? Now, of course, you can gain access to that expertise, reaching out to Fortuna Admissions to share your story. And we'll be able to look through your background academically, professionally, the different passions and interests that you have, and tie all of that together with your next steps in business school, the schools you're looking at, and really give you a very honest, a very candid, and we hope a very, very helpful assessment of your chances applying to business school. But of course, I'm going to turn all of this over to my colleagues. And just maybe before we sort of dive into the next 4.5 months, it's already been quite a year as we look at the 2020-2021 admissions cycle. Karla, of course, you've been working with lots of great applicants applying to Harvard and other M7 schools, but super, super busy year for the schools, right?
Yes, absolutely. It was definitely the busiest in my recent memory. Well, actually, since I've ever started doing this kind of work. So definitely busy, but I'll let others chime in on that as well.
Right, and it may not end here. I mean, Julia, you've through your experience at both Kellogg and Chicago, you obviously realized that counter cycles, people figuring this is a great time to go to business school. So already, as we look at the year ahead, we're expecting another very busy year.
Yes, and I think when we're seeing that, and as I've connected with prospective students and also talked to former colleagues at the business schools, a surge across all MBA programs. So I think that sort of time of this feels like the right time for some during the pandemic, making that time investment for the testing or also for really reflecting on those stories was happening at the executive MBA level, part-time, evening, weekend programs, as well as I think the full-time programs, as we've seen, have probably seen the biggest bump.
Right, and an international phenomenon. Caroline, you were the admissions director at INSEAD for 7 years. The one-year program that's proving to be so popular, and I think INSEAD, among other top European business schools, is seeing record demand.
That's true, Matt. Yes, and so we saw the uptick starting in spring last year. And that has been maintained. So certainly, a surge in applications, as you say, from around the world. And I think also what we've seen over the last few months is an increase in application volume, specifically from international candidates for US schools, because I think there was some pent-up demand where people were hesitating a little bit about whether to come to the US. They're waiting to see the outcome of the US election and so on. And so in round two, that there has been an increase in application volume internationally to the US schools, especially.
Right. So unleashing that pent-up demand, it's going to be another highly competitive year, or even those candidates that postponed taking an online GMAT or GRE test, they felt more comfortable with testing conditions in a formal test center. So a busy year ahead. And how do you, as a candidate, really make sure that you stand out? Now, you've got a sense already of the wonderful panelists that we brought together for this Fortuna session together. We have many other recordings that look specifically at an iconic Stanford essay about what matters most to you and why, or Harvard and what they're looking for and how recommenders can reinforce that. Obviously, that monster INSEAD application that Caroline, I still hold you personally responsible for all.
I apologize.
But so do check out those many resources, and I see that already you've started with questions. I will try to monitor those questions as we go and share them with our panelists and get their perspectives. But also the idea that this is one in a series, and starting with the first masterclass of getting ready for round two, for round one, we'll then be running masterclasses every Tuesday, same time. Next week is going to be a focus on resumes and application forms. And then, of course, we dive into the essays that schools typically publish in May. And then, for many, really kick things off. So we hope that you'll join us through the next 60 minutes and, of course, next week. We've got a lot to get through and so much insight and great experience from my colleagues. So I'm going to start with Karla. And really, Karla, as we look at the next 4 or 5 months, we've captured this with this idea of reflection and assessment. What does that mean to you?
I think in terms of reflection and assessment, I think a lot of business schools are going to be looking for a number of important elements, but looking back on this past year, how has this year changed you? In fact, I know that there's some programs like Julia, I know at Kellogg, they even ask you about, how has this year, changed and influenced even your leadership style. I think it's important as it always is, but I think increasingly, given how much this world has changed, and a number of businesses have changed, maybe your goals have changed, or maybe the pandemic was what launched you into wanting to essentially pursue an MBA. And so I think what top schools are going to be looking for is, the ability to not only adapt and thrive in different situations, but also how has this past year informed your strategy for what you want to do moving forward. So you want to think about, number one, your goals, short and long term. And then you also want to think through what are the different components of my application, and are there any gaps or any areas that I need to work to overcome, such as test scores, or if you have a lower than ideal GPA, perhaps you want to pursue other opportunities with respect to, maybe taking another course. There's so many different courses through Coursera. HBS has HBS Online now that you could, enhance sort of the overall robustness of your application and your overall academic profile. Maybe there's other opportunities with respect to, extracurricular and other elements that we'll discuss as well. But I do think that taking a deep look at what is it that I'm after and how will the MBA program help me in terms of my short and long-term ambitions, and then thinking through assessing your fit for the different institutions, along those various components that I just mentioned, as well as what is this degree going to do for you and what do the different programs offer?
Right. Now, of course, together, Karla, we recorded a session on what Harvard Business School is looking for, which has been viewed by tens of thousands of people. It's a must view for anyone thinking about applying to the MBA program in Boston. But this idea of reflection, of course, the school asks, what more should we know about you? So it's what sort of holding up a mirror, no holds barred, and really sort of digging deep, the sort of second layer of introspection to get a sense of, the things that matter to you and where you're heading.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that the reflection piece goes beyond what would show up on a resume. So as you reflect on what is it that I'm after, don't just stick to the topics that you think would be appropriate for, a job interview. You want to think through what are the things that I have faced in my life experiences. This past year, I think a lot of us have faced a lot of unexpected challenges and have learned a lot from it. And so I think they like to see that the personal elements, and sharing stories that would never show up on your resume. And I think that can be something that's helpful, not just for HBS, but for a lot of the other programs, because that'll help you expand on your candidacy and also make a connection with the readers, which can be really, really difficult to do. I think you're going to want to focus on why you're great in every capacity that you can kind of show off and demonstrate your ability to succeed. But I do think that it's also helpful to reflect on the areas that have challenged you and how you've pushed yourself and how you've gotten stronger because of that. So the reflection process is something that I work on with my colleagues, as well as, with my clients, as well as my colleagues will work on with other applicants as they're trying to think through what is the story that I'm trying to share. I oftentimes think of it like you're preparing a recipe. And so you have your core ingredients that are going to be yours and truly yours, but you may need to prepare a little bit of a different recipe for the different programs that you're considering. So the appetite at Stanford is slightly different from the appetite at Harvard versus Wharton, but you need to be faithful to those core ingredients that are yours. So that's part of what we do in the process of working with applicants, is helping them really understand, what are their core values, what are their challenges, what are their opportunities that can help them stand out, because I do think that the reflection angle does yield that personal, story or narrative that can really buttress, in a way, I think, the overall strength of an application.
Right. Julia, Karla just mentioned 4 ingredients, which immediately must take you to some of the best baking recipes that are out there. She also talks about, of course, school cultures. Do you think at this early stage we make it school specific, or is it really individual specific?
Yeah, so I think that's a great point and something I was thinking about. And in this reflect and assess stage, while throughout the application journey, there are going to be many, many micro decisions, I look at this stage, there's really 2 key things to start. And it's in these big decisions in your MBA journey, one of which is, what's the right school or schools for me? And the other piece, so right fit institution, and then the stories you're going to tell. But I think, as Karla pointed out, really start with self first, because that's going to help inform your choice of schools. So thinking about, again, what's influenced your journey so far, what has shaped your values, one thing that we talked about when I was at Kellogg, and we really encouraged our students to reflect on, are those crucible moments. And as Karla pointed out, we've probably all had many during the pandemic. So these ways that you've been challenged as you never have before, how did you overcome that? How did you step up? So those really help to shape your personal brand, but then really envisioning where you want to go on your journey, which then will help inform the schools. So in terms of what are the types of academic experiences you're hoping to get? What's the curricular, co-curricular, professional experience? And then what's the environment? So as you've done that reflection and you've really thought about your values, then you can start to map against those institutions. So those 2 things they can be happening in parallel, but it's really doing, that self-reflection first. So when it's time to start writing those applications or telling your story of why Harvard or Booth or Wharton is the best for you, you can authentically connect those dots on how personally you're going to add to the community.
Right. Now, of course, all of you in working with clients at Fortuna have built up that mirror and helped to join those dots. At the assessment level, Caroline, even as we've talked about individuals applying to schools like INSEAD, like London Business School, that place so much emphasis on international credentials. But it's not as straightforward as saying, well, I worked in banking in Zurich for 2 years, or I did part of a study exchange in Brazil, whatever. It is digging deeper just to find ways, even in that international dimension, what that reflects and says about you as a person, even if you never left your home country.
Yes, that's right, Matt. It's not just about clocking up credentials and adding up numbers of years or months outside of your home country where you're looking to convey your international experience. What the schools are looking for is what you have gained from that. What have you learned? How have you developed as an individual? How have you grown from those experiences? And therefore, what do you bring to the classroom? What will other people learn from you? That they can see the facts and figures on your resume, but the reason why the schools have essays and as well as the recommendations and so many different parts of these applications is because they're looking to dig beyond those those key credentials and understand why you've made those choices. Why did you pursue that path? Why did you want to go work in banking in Zurich? And how did it challenge you? What did you learn about working across cultures? So it's really important to, think carefully before you dive into writing the applications about what you've learned, how you've grown, and therefore, what you bring to that collective learning experience that is so critical to the MBA program.
And I guess the reflection and assessment never stops, because I need to make sure that I ask the right question to the right panelist. Yeah. And I'm going to turn now to the next one. You all managed that beautifully, because I was taking you in many directions. And Karla, this idea of sort of research and network. This year, 2021, Harvard Business School celebrates 100 years of the case method, that famous pin factory that a professor must have taken a look at back in 100 years ago. But that's not enough, right? We're all supposed to know that Harvard teaches the case method. There's touchy-feely in Palo Alto. But this really can sort of start to help you to identify the right fit, but how that will then ultimately come across in the application.
Yeah, the opportunity to do research and to network is something that I think always takes a back burner in the process. And so for those of you who are here today, I applaud you for starting this process. But this is one of the earlier stages that I think can become less urgent as you get into it, because it's not part of the actual physical application that you're going to be submitting, but it's so foundational in terms of the success of it. And what I mean by that is that doing research, understanding that you're not just applying to a list of schools, as some do, that are just, I'm going to apply to the top 5 or the top 7, without really understanding how unique and different these schools are. That was something that surprised me as I got to know the different programs and the different directors at the different schools when I was in admissions, and how everybody does the process of admission at one school could be dramatically different, even the individuals who are in the room making the decision, and that has a dramatic impact on the process itself. Beyond that, also understanding, I've had situations where applicants may be dealing with, well, I have these multiple offers and where do I go? Understanding too that, once you zero in on your vision, many of you may know exactly what you want to do or have always had a dream to do X, Y, or Z, but there's a lot of people who are looking at the MBA and they're not quite sure, but they do know that the serendipity factor does go up exponentially at a place like HBS or Stanford or Wharton or Kellogg. And I do think that it's really important to understand what are the different pathways out of the school. So looking at where do the alumni go, and then the ways that you can conduct this research, the 2 main things that I like to focus on are you can reach out to individuals directly. There are some programs where the students do respond to cold emails. So that's one particular way that you can do it. I also recommend going back into your network and looking at perhaps where you went for undergrad and seeing who went to business school where you're potentially looking to go, and have a conversation with that individual. It can be a great opportunity to start, reaching out to individuals. And I do believe in the power of the cold email. Liz Wessel, who's one of the most successful people, she's probably 28. She's one of my mentors, is because she built her business way up on this whole idea. And she was a Wharton undergrad. And it's really just reaching out to your mentors and asking them. And it's a great way to also get to know the school. So when these conversations that you'll have with individuals, understanding what did the program do for you? What did you want to do going in, and did that change? What was the career services support like? Understanding all of these elements may actually surprise you at the end. I found some individuals who at the end of the process, what they thought was their dream school changed. And so that can be very valuable, because as much as the schools are looking at you, you also want to take a good look at them to figure out the fit. And it may not be that HBS is the absolute perfect place for you. It does everything in its power to be everything to everyone, but it may be that Stanford or Wharton or another program will actually be a better catalyst for your success, depending on where you want to go. One last anecdote around that was I had a client who turned down a Wharton offer for Kellogg because he wanted to work at a place like Netflix and the media marketing, not to bucket Kellogg as just a marketing program, but they had a much bigger funnel into this one particular industry. And so he was like, a lot of people are telling me to go to Wharton or whatever. And I was like, you need to go where it's going to actually suit you in terms of your ambitions and goals. And I think he's like, I feel like it's home for me. And so it was an interesting process that because he invested so much in the research, he was able to find something that was the perfect fit for him. And so the research can, go hand in hand with also starting to build out your network, which business schools are going to teach you to do, but getting started now will give you a head start. And as all of us want our clients to be as ahead of the curve here. So, starting to reach out to others, you can look through LinkedIn and see, who do I know? Maybe some of my friends from college or some of my, colleagues that I worked with at another business have gone on to business school. So reactivating those connections or, picking up the phone and giving them a call can be really, really helpful. It can also help with even writing the specific areas of your essay. I can't tell you how many clients have come back and said, yeah, I had a conversation with so-and-so and my Why Stanford essay is already written. So that can be really helpful. And then also, just the information sessions too that the schools do offer, you want to pay attention to those. I would recommend going to at least one. One of my clients this year was put on the spot during one of her interviews when it was like, how did you get to know our program if you never attended an information session? So they're tracking this. And, she had a good answer to it because she'd known the school, she lived in the city where the program was and wasn't a stranger to it. But it was interesting to see that some schools are paying attention to this. And I do think that that may play into their sense of how likely are you to go there if you're admitted. So, the research and network piece can be critically important, and setting that foundation now, I think, is great, and getting in the habit of, reaching out to individuals, not that they all have to be cold emails, but I do think that process can be, sort of synergistic with helping you in many different aspects of the application.
All of us, of course, have so many conversations with Fortuna clients. Often it's the biggest problem of all. It's a nice challenge to have, but when they've got multiple offers, and I like your idea of, this felt like home, because it will become your family for the next year or 2 years, and certainly an extended network for the rest of your career. So, and Julia, whether it's Booth, Kellogg, it's not that we're turning this into a popularity contest of, I spoke to 26 Booth MBAs before I applied to the program. As Karla was suggesting, it might be, 2 or 3 individuals that either have some sort of shared heritage and background, or perhaps maybe they were president of a particular club in the second year, and that's a club that you'd be allowed to be involved with. There must be some sort of smart ideas in terms of who you look to research with.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And, one thing that I've seen across the board, again, not just in MBA admissions, but as people are even looking at career changes and things like that, people love to share their journey. So if you approach it with authentic curiosity and you go about it smartly, so to your point, Matt, you think about ways you can connect the dots with them. So it's not just spamming 25 people. It's saying, okay, here's someone, I'm interested in you because of this, or I'd love to hear about, and getting them to talk and share. And, you're looking for nothing in return except for their perspective and their information, and doing that in a gracious way and showing appreciation really is, I think, such an important part of the journey, because it will give you this deeper perspective on the institutional experience and culture in a way that you can't always, it's harder to get on the website. It will give you a sense of fit. It might give you some anecdotes that, what I found, sometimes it can be hard, I caution against too much name dropping in the applications, but it's more, I think it's at interview time, when if you've made some serious connections and things that it's just when if you can sit there and say, wow, well, I talked to so-and-so who was the president of the entrepreneur club at Kellogg and was able to have this experience while also doing this, and how it set her on a completely new path and blah, blah, blah. And that really spoke to me, that can be incredibly powerful. So definitely agree, those sort of that, tapping into networks in different ways are going to be very valuable. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, as Karla had mentioned, many people will respond. They'll make time for it. They, again, especially if they have that sense of pride in their alma mater, that it's, they're happy to sort of answer the call. And then the other piece in terms of sort of the research and more networking with the institution, definitely, sort of engage early and often, not over the top, but making sure, looking at those opportunities to attend an information session, attend a class, whether it's a virtual lecture or soon things may open up in live time, other types of events, because the schools, they do track that. And it's not to say that they're always rating you against that, but it does come down to, as you've touched on, yield. And it does show a deeper level of interest and sincerity of interest if you have engaged appropriately kind of throughout the process. And it's not all done in the last 2 weeks as you're about to hit submit. So again, that's where this conversation is perfectly well timed. So you can be sort of mindful and intentional about what that engagement looks like.
Right. And I guess as we look forward to a period where we can travel again, where we can visit campuses again, just don't show up in July when there are no students around, thinking about trying to get out of that application. Caroline, as the former gatekeeper at INSEAD, I mean, you had the final say on over 30,000 applicants to the INSEAD MBA program. Could you tell when an applicant had really taken the time to research and get to know the school?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it really shines through in the application, often in some very subtle ways. And schools aren't always asking for you to write vast amounts about why you're applying to that particular school in the application. And in fact, INSEAD used to have a question about, why do you want to do an MBA and why INSEAD? And they took it out of the application as an effort to cut it down. As you said, Matt, it's a very, very long application. So that's one thing that has been cut out. And they shifted that discussion to the interview stage. So as Julia said, that it's really important to have done all that research, because a lot of that will play into the conversation that you have at the interview. It's great to have done all that research, that reflection, because even if you're not specifically writing in the application about why I really want to go to this school, why it's my dream school, what I'm going to get out of the program. If you have a very strong sense of your fit with a program, why that community resonates with you, you're more likely to, convey your story in a way that resonates with the file reader, and they'll connect the dots with, what you bring, your profile, and how that is a great fit with the school. So having that strong sense of fit before you start to write will help you a lot with your written application, and absolutely critically at the interview stage.
Right, two great questions that have come in from Adam. Adam, thank you for these two, and many others that are writing in with these. The schools themselves facilitate chats with current MBA students. So do any of you panelists see the sort of the pros and cons? They've been self-selected students to connect with you versus perhaps the sort of the unfettered version. And then as a follow-up to that, just being conscious of that individual's time, what feels right? Sort of a 15-minute discussion to find out more about the school. Karla, any thoughts on those?
Yeah, I think it depends. And when in doubt, you always want to be mindful of the fact that this is a volunteer effort on their side. I do think that it can be helpful to do both, to do the formal one that the school facilitates, and then, speak with others that are in your own network or the network that you're creating. And I think Julia's points were particularly salient in the sense that, there are a number of individuals that will really enjoy this opportunity to reflect and reminisce on their time. And oftentimes they're not asked in a day-to-day, whether it's someone who's a senior executive, oftentimes they don't get the opportunity to do this. But I think that, you want to be mindful. I think 15 minutes is sufficient to get a lot of really interesting information. And if it goes on longer, you want to make sure that you're not the one that's making it go on and on and on. But if they're excited about sharing their experiences, then let them continue to talk. But I think Yeah, you want to balance it. I would take advantage of the opportunities that the schools provide as much as possible. Especially, I saw a comment from someone else around like how difficult it is to visit, programs. And this year it was almost impossible. One of my clients had even driven to Boston in hopes of, coming to campus at a local Boston school, and no one's around, so it's been shut down. But there are virtual opportunities, and so as we sort of navigate our way out of this. Take full advantage. There's going to be opportunities that they're going to list on their event pages. Different schools have different ways to communicate this information, but make sure that you're following. Chad Losey has the Direct from the Director blog. Other MBA programs have different ways to engage and sign up for different events. I do want to note that if you do sign up for something, make sure that you go as much as possible. So you don't want to be signing up for a bunch of things and then not actually showing up, particularly if there's, if it's in person and you're taking someone else's seat. But you can still get to know a program very well through other individuals and learning from their experiences, everything from which classes or professors or clubs and activities did you participate in that were helpful for you in achieving your goals. I think that there's many different ways to do this. The 15 minutes, I think, is a good rule of thumb.
Great. Right. Well, we'll move on to the next slide. This feels like this is a message that we were trying to get to the White House a year ago related to COVID. But in this case, of course, we're referring to the GMAT and the GRE. And a couple of people have written with their own questions about, I'm at 7:30, should I take the test again to nudge that score up an extra 20 points? Caroline, your thoughts? I mean, we've sort of already framed it in terms of testing early. Is that part of just getting it out of the way to then be able to concentrate on the applications at the later stage?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why we love speaking with candidates early in the process. It's great if you can get some of these things out of the way early so that later on you're able to focus on your written application, because it can be quite difficult. No doubt you have a demanding day job. So trying to juggle writing essays and doing justice to all of your written application at the same time as GMAT prep or GRE prep is very challenging. And so, and often, people, don't have a lot of time, right? You don't have a lot of free time. And also sometimes candidates procrastinate because, let's face it, right? It's not a lot of fun coming home and spending your free time plowing through lots of practice test questions. I'm sure there's lots of other fun things that you'd rather be doing with your free time. So it's easy to neglect it and leave it to the last minute. But I would really encourage you to, just start as early as you can. You could even get this test out of the way a year or two early, right? The test is valid for 5 years. So the earlier you can do it, the better. We often work, Matt, with Scott Woodbury-Stewart from Target Test Prep. And he said the other day that he reckons that it's about 400 to 500 hours of work for many candidates to get the GMAT score that they're capable of. So that's a huge amount of time. I think the most common mistake is people underestimate the amount of time it will take them to get the score that they would really like to have. And that really does them justice. It is the one factor or one of the few factors that's under your control at this stage in the process, right? You can't go back and change your GPA. You can't necessarily, change jobs, or you can't necessarily completely revamp your extracurricular profile at this stage in the process, right? So if you're looking at applying in round one, there are still some things that you can do to shape your profile. But one of the key levers that you do have at this stage is the tests, right? So give yourself the benefit of, do yourself justice in the test if you possibly can. I know a lot of people are skeptical about the GMAT, and Karla and I, sometimes debate about this. She's not a big fan of the test. We all love to hate the GMAT and the GRE, right? And often students and alumni are skeptical about, what's really the value of this test. And, you can look at my undergraduate transcript and see that, I went to a top school, I got a great GPA. Why do I have to jump through this hoop as well? I was skeptical about the GMAT. And when I went to work at INSEAD, I'd taken the GMAT myself, obviously, and did the MBA. And then a couple of years later, went back to work at the school. And like many people, I'm skeptical about the test. And so we actually did some analysis to look at the correlation between the GMAT and how people do academically on the program. And it is a very strong correlation. And sometimes it's particularly important in a very diverse applicant pool, like the pool at INSEAD or London Business School, where people are literally coming from all over the world from so many different educational institutions that it can be difficult for the school to compare the different tracks that people have taken. So this is one common data point that they have. And so, the GMAT was designed for business schools. And it does actually, correlate with academic success. Of course, not necessarily with professional success and all of the other things that you hope to get out of the program, but the schools do take it seriously. Having said that, of course, they will look at the GMAT or the GRE in the context of your academic profile overall. So, they'll be looking at your academic ability holistically alongside. So the GMAT will be assessed alongside your undergraduate track record. Where did you study? What did you study? What GPA did you get? They'll be looking at your grades in individual courses. So, if there is a bit of a weakness in that test, then perhaps, you can compensate to a certain extent with a really strong undergraduate test record.
Right, which answers a couple of the questions that we've got of, can a high test score compensate and mitigate a lower GPA? So many myths, Julia, perhaps also so much wishful thinking around these tests. Well, they must understand the hours that I work. But I mean, the conversations that you would have, applicants are busy people, but others, have found time. Some people test. I mean, what sort of conversations would you have, behind the curtains in the admissions office about GMAT and the sort of tolerance that you would show?
Yeah, well, and it is, and I think as Caroline pointed out, it's one of many data points. It is still an important one. And so I think it may have been an earlier question about, well, if I did really well on the GMAT, does that then compensate for a GPA? So I think it's kind of looking at the GMAT is going to be one representation of your potential academic performance. The GPA and undergraduate performance is critically important as well. So there's kind of that something in between that while test prep is still very important, if some of it is also just showing I had the chops, maybe I wasn't in the right major in college, maybe, so in my case, I was a liberal arts major in college, and I know one of my kind of quant requirements was a course that most people called Rocks for Jocks. I thought geology was interesting, but it also didn't involve calculus. So when I was applying to business schools, I was working in New York at the time, I took a class at NYU in statistics. And I did that ahead of, and it was probably 6 months out from the application due date. And I was able to, I really put the focus on that as well as kind of test prep, but it was able to show, this strong grade in a quantitative score. So it's kind of thinking holistically, what are things that you might need to shore up to show that you do have, you can meet the rigorous requirements. And then if needed, again, now that there are other tests out there, now that the GRE is acceptable as well, if you have given yourself more time to prep and you feel like maybe GMAT didn't represent you as well, go ahead and try the GRE. But I think the time of the preparation is going to be very important. And so it's not something that, it's easy to cram for. And as Caroline mentioned, not only just the countless hours, it's sort of the accumulation of it too over a period of time. So, think about ways you can invest in that data point, maybe, looking at 1 or 2 tests, but also if there's other parts of your academic record you can work on, this is a perfect time to be thinking about that too.
Well, we know that this is a subject that raises many emotions. I've just seen a flood of questions all coming in just about the GMAT and the GRE. We could stay on this alone. Just one final comment I'd love from you, Karla, because I've read so many testimonials of individuals where you've helped them to find their voice, a sense of purpose, and they could have stopped short if they said, oh, I'm 20, 30 points short of the average GMAT of the school I'm applying to. and actually taken the school off their list, which would have been such a shame given the stories that they had to share. So we have to put this in context, right?
Absolutely. I think it is, just to echo what both Caroline and Julia have said, it's one data point. It isn't, it isn't the determining factor. And I've seen people that did exceptionally well, almost a perfect score, imagine themselves as just having a ticket anywhere. And that's not true. I've, seen, I worked with applicants that had barely over a 600 get into HBS. And that's because the story was so compelling and their background and perspective was so compelling that it did meet the need of it depends on a number of different factors. You have to think about where you're coming from professionally, nationality, as well as, different, there's so many different components to it. And also too, it's not just the overall score. Sometimes, I had a client who came to me and she was like, well, I'm not worried about anything. I've got a 740 on my GMAT. And I was like, I don't care about the overall score. What is your quant? Because most programs, and again, there's variation here among different programs. And that's something to also do the research on, is look at the spread, what is the range and where do I fall? And if I'm below average, are there other compelling reasons? Perhaps I come from a different background, perhaps I have a different experience or different insights, or a different educational background, that can actually really change. If you're not working in consulting or banking, then it's almost like you have a different test score that, depending on the program that you have to achieve. And I really would want to focus on the quant. I've had people with a 690 that are more competitive test score wise than someone with a 740, because let's say, 47 and higher was sort of, it's not like a hard, floor, but that's sort of like, no one's going to be really terribly worried about your quantitative skills, but that varies tremendously from school to school. But I would always look for, certain numbers in certain programs. And, again, it's very much like a moving target, I guess. So it's good to talk to other people. It's good to talk to, other students and look at the data that they provide and test your assumptions too, because again, that person who assumed she had a 44 in her quant, and I was like, I'm actually quite worried. You have a perfect verbal, but you're American, so we might need to focus on, either retaking this or maybe pursue the GRE. The GRE, I think, can sometimes be a better assessment of like using real-time, skills with the access to a calculator, things like that could help you get a higher percentage-wise, quant score. So I know at INSEAD, it was something that they focused on. In particular, there was, concern that usually if the quant was far below average, that could be concerning. But again, this varies school to school. Some programs like to see 700 plus, whereas other programs are agnostic about what the number begins with. You could have a 50 in your quant and it really almost doesn't matter what your verbal is. But if you're coming from a place where English is not spoken, that may be viewed differently. So again, you want to talk to individuals who have that understanding and awareness and ask questions from as many people as possible. But that's a great reason to talk to a consultant who can tell you. And I would talk to more than one when you're asking specifically about the test. The reality is that you don't know until you apply, but you can certainly get a sense of like, am I generally competitive? Looking at the overall number and, the balance between the verbal and the quant.
So I think as all of our panelists have reinforced, talk it through. If you have a PhD in engineering with a near perfect GPA, we're thinking about a school that has a test optional, reach out to us. Let's look through your profile and see where that fits for the rest of the story. Multiple schools, which one would you supply? Talk it through. Get in touch with Fortuna and we can answer all of these questions. CFA that will mitigate the GPA and these tests. But clearly it always is very personal. And it's just one part of the picture, which is why we're going to keep moving and move on to the professional profile. The average age of business school, it's 26 and a half, 27 at Stanford, Harvard, a couple of years older at schools like INSEAD and London Business School. So, bringing that professional profile and sharing that part of your story, this wonderful opportunity that you have to do that in different components of the application. So, I guess, Julia, I'm going to turn to you and all of the opportunities that the application gives you, therefore how you can invest in your professional story.
Sure. So when I'm working with prospective students, this is another area where you start with reflection. So really thinking about, as you think about your professional life, what are some of your proudest professional moments and why? And start to capture these stories. So what are ways that you've made significant impact, kind of contributions to organizations you've worked with? So really sort of capturing those stories, because, and just, the two schools that I've worked directly for and that come to mind, like, Kellogg has an essay question about how you've, this idea of creating lasting value. Booth is very focused on impact as well. So if, when you're doing that, if you want to start to look at what some of the themes are that these business schools focus on that are kind of top of your list, but then really thinking about, how you might capture those stories. And again, much like on whether it's on the test or the academic side, are there any ways that you can further enhance your professional profile and how that's going to come across? So what are things that you can do? Can you take stretch assignments or new assignments at work? Again, many questions will touch on things like leadership, collaboration. But so are you getting those experiences, or can you have some ways that you can start to get those? Can you take on leadership roles that are either might be internal within your organization, or professional organizations you can become a part of? So really thinking about how well are you kind of capturing your professional trajectory, doing the reflection. I mean, I've worked with students, and one in particular that had some unusual paths early on in his career. And as we really start to reflect on that more, it really showed that this allowed him, some of these overseas experiences and non-traditional jobs allowed him to develop a sense of like empathy and ability to connect cross-culturally. And so then when he moved to his current role, where he's leading philanthropic efforts at a large institution, he can talk to anyone. He can quickly make connections with the high-level philanthropists or those that might be receiving some of their funds. And that's kind of, a bit of his professional superpower. But it took from, in that case, I think initially he went into the process thinking, do I need to sort of apologize for this divergent experience that I've had? And I went off the path, and we realized, no, that's part of your story. And it's part of what helped lead you to where you are now. So again, think about if there's things like that that may need additional explanation, but that can be part of your story in a very good and powerful way. And then also where you sit today in ways that over the next 5 to 6 months, you can further enhance your profile.
Right. And I suppose this idea of investing in your profile, Caroline, it also talks to, getting started earlier. So you can reflect on if you've stagnated in a position. We talk about how that third year of investment banking looks so much like the second year in the deep dive analysis that we did for the Harvard and Stanford incoming classes. Many of those individuals at Goldman, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and elsewhere had then taken that time to step away, get other industry experience, new sectors. It was very eclectic what they'd chosen to do. So you can't start early enough thinking about the investment and the impact that you're making in your professional career.
Yes, that's right. And that's why we love to speak with people as early as possible, even straight out of college and thinking about going to business school in 3 or 4 years' time, because, sort of planning that path and thinking about how you want to, what you want to get out of your professional experience and what you want to be able to showcase when the time comes to apply, that advanced planning is very helpful. So, if there are participants online today who are thinking about applying, not potentially in round 1, but later on, then, you have more lead time to develop your profile. And so think strategically about, what is the experience that could really help you stand out in a very competitive pool. But even if you are targeting round 1, there may be additional projects that, as Julia said, stretch assignments that you could take on, or something that's just a bit different from what your peers are doing, that will give you an interesting story to tell. And also think about this in the context of your recommenders. You may well have a recommendation from someone who is working with you right now. Hopefully your current supervisor, that would be an ideal choice for recommender. And so, if you can take on something additional now, or do something that's a little bit unusual, that will be fresh in their memory when they come to write your recommendations. So now would be a good time to distinguish yourself and build that profile. So yes, I mean, think about what you can do. And I think also what we've seen over the past 12 months is that, COVID has really changed things for a lot of people in the workplace. And some people have been able to use that to take on additional responsibilities and do something that they might not otherwise have had the opportunity to do. And so think about that as well. Think about how the pandemic has impacted your organization, and what story can you tell about, how you took the lead in that context, and what you did to help your organization potentially in a difficult time, or help customers or help clients through a difficult period, and what you did to step up to address the challenges of the past 12 months.
Right. Karla, when I host events with Kirsten Moss, the admissions director at Stanford, she talks about her admissions team's fascination with behaviors. When I host another event with Chad Losey and the HBS team, they talk about patterns. Now, whether it's behaviors, patterns, or patterns of behavior in professional profiles, but also in extracurriculars, all of these different opportunities that we have to then, share with the admissions office. I guess, whether it's leadership, innovative thinking, impact, and extracurriculars can carry just as much weight.
Yeah, it's fascinating because the extracurriculars, it's complicated, right? I think there's this affection for them because they do demonstrate, in particular, you talk about patterns with HBS, there was always the sense of like, we want to see a habit of leadership. We want to see engaged community citizenship. We want to see an appetite to do more and to give back as well, to contribute to something that's larger than just your own bank account, although, business school is expensive. But I do think that they want to see that demonstrated. They don't want to just hear that you care about X, Y, or Z. They want to see evidence of it. So extracurriculars are a way to show them through your actions. What do you do in your free time? Now, the caveat here is that it can be difficult. And I think a lot of folks reach out to me saying there's not much time, especially if you're working in investment banking or financial services in particular, or even consulting for that matter, and you're traveling all the time. It can be really difficult to have a robust set of extracurriculars. Or if you do, it's almost suspicious. It's like, how is it that you're working 100 plus hours a week and also doing 20 hours? I mean, it may raise eyebrows, not in a good way. So you want to, number one, be honest, but I think there's different ways to fold in activities that, so for example, I had one client who was, she was so funny. She was European and she's like, it's so American to have all these extracurriculars. Like, we Europeans don't have a laundry list of activities. And I thought her point was well taken, but it was also, she was like, I'm going to leave the section blank. And I was like, it's a mistake. And I can't imagine that there's nothing that you do. What is it outside of your professional life that you invest in and that you care about and you contribute to? And in that conversation, we were able to unearth a lot of different activities that she actually does. And maybe they're not as formalized as someone might expect that they need to be. Now, it's great to have, things like Girls Who Code or a big brother, big sister, those are things that you should, talk about if they are part of what you do. But in the absence of those, where we landed with her, I remember she talked about that she worked at McKinsey and at a lot of the offsites, she would get her teams together and do these yoga or mindfulness sessions because she's like, it helps us connect with each other. And it also helps to, bond outside. We oftentimes at the end of the day, just go home and crash. So it was a way that she had sort of shown leadership in pulling people together in a setting when they were offsite together working with a client, and it contributed to cohesion. And that was, she had a habit of doing this in different capacities. She did it in college. And so it's, what else do you do outside of work? It doesn't need to be that you are president of X, Y, or Z, or, on the board of X, Y, or Z for it to be something that is worth mentioning. And so I do think that, there's, and I see a question here about young children. I think that absolutely highlight that, your activities are spent being a parent. That's leadership. Oh my goodness, is that leadership? You're helping to mold the next generation. So talk about how do you contribute? Maybe you are I don't know, a coach on a sports team for one of your kids, or you do something, that it can come in so many different shapes and sizes. And so I think the mistake that is often made is the assumption that like, oh, I should start doing this activity right now. One of my other clients who was admitted to HBS had talked about, he'd taken up improv comedy, and that actually was something that was really interesting. And it was also connected to his story about, stretching himself outside his comfort zone. And so the different ways that he was able to get up on stage and overcome his fears, but also, how he talked about part of his superpower at work was his sense of humor, and so using that to connect with others, and then overcoming his fear of public speaking through improv comedy, which is really hard, it turns out, but it was a big part of their conversation in the interview ultimately. And so, he had not imagined that, I've taken a few improv classes. Does that count? It absolutely counts. So we'll have a discussion around, different outside activities, whether you play guitar with your friends on the weekend, or, you do, I don't know, you have a fascination for French black and white films, who knows, but it could be an opportunity where you connect with others and that you contribute to something that also adds dynamism to your profile. So, again, it's great to talk to other individuals, but don't try to just add something to your resume. It looks very suspicious if it's like, oh, you just started doing this a few months before you applied. It's just you're posturing for the application. So it's oftentimes better. And even some good advice that I remember hearing was from I forget where, but at any rate, it was like, think back to what you did in college, and maybe it's an opportunity to reactivate those links, to different activities or organizations that you contributed to, or maybe you did a turkey trot, or you did a fun run for something that raised money for charity. So fundraising is a great way for MBA students to show engaged community citizenship, and it doesn't demand 15 hours a week. And so there's many different ways to exhibit that you are someone who cares about others, that, wants to help improve whatever it is that you engage in. And that's the essence of really what they're after.
Right. And to pick up on a couple of the points, Julia, that Karla made about, habits of behavior and seeing that sort of extended engagement, as enriching as it is to walk puppies on the weekend. It's not doing that the weekend before you apply to business school down at the animal shelter that's really going to shift the dial. Fundraising, all of these different areas, but really showing a level of engagement, preferably over an extended period of time.
Yes. And really thinking about ways you can get involved and sort of what motivates you. So if you do, it's something, so personally, I've always been passionate about education, and I started to get involved in organizations that focused on early childhood education, focused on literacy for immigrants, for other things. That's a way that it was sort of tapping a passion, but I could get involved. I didn't have to worry about, was I an ESL teacher for 6 years straight? But I could connect the dots of the ways that sort of that other personal passion made a difference to me. Same thing with, activities. And I loved the point that Caroline made about really, and Karla, thinking outside the box. So whether it's, you might like to write, and you might not be, sharing those stories broadly, but that could be something, again, a way that you are spending some of your time, might be reading and posting about, the books to those in your network. So there are many different ways that you can sort of show this authentic self, and, that what makes you tick. Because I think, there is, we hear across business schools, they really want to build a diverse class, but diversity comes in many forms. And it really means they want to bring in this sort of connection, this cohort of individuals that are going to bring different things, different life experiences, different perspectives to the schools. And that if you show that it's not just, I work, I make dinner, I go to bed, or, binge Netflix, it's just that any ways that you can show you're part of the engaged community. And I loved the question from the parent, because there are many, parents now applying to business schools, or those thinking about, I'm going to be starting my family. And that's been a way that you have now learned to become a master a master juggler and probably more organized, more, ability to focus sharply on different things. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can tackle this question.
Right, and there's no timeline on this. You've both given examples. You can go back to college, things that you were involved with there, but any extracurricular, I guess, going back to high school, if it really speaks to you. Now, there's your voice at the heart of this application, but there are at least two other voices that are also being brought into this. So, Caroline, I'm going to hand this one over to you, and we talk about outreach and getting the ball rolling, making the right choices, who you might choose, and starting that conversation with them.
Yes. And now is a great time to start to think about who your recommenders are, because as we said, with the GMAT, people often underestimate how long it's going to take them to get the score that they want. You also might find that, your recommenders are very busy and you can't entirely control when they're going to work on their side of your application. So you should definitely have those conversations earlier rather than later and give them plenty of time to give their input. So at this stage, it's good to be thinking about, who are your ideal recommenders. I recommend at the start of the process having, ideally 3 people at least in mind. In most cases, you'll need 2 recommendations, but it's good to have an extra one in case somebody becomes unavailable at the last minute. I can't tell you the number of times when I was at INSEAD that, I would get panicked phone calls from candidates at admissions deadline time. And, they had done everything that they needed to do and had sent in a beautiful application and had spent a great deal of time on it and, dotting every I and crossing every T, but then their recommender has disappeared on vacation, right? And so they were off in a ski chalet and it was New Year and they were uncontactable. And so, they were frantic because of that. So it does happen that you might need a backup. So I recommend thinking about 3 people. And sometimes candidates are concerned about asking their current supervisor. And that's often a difficult conversation to have because essentially you're signaling to your boss that you would like to leave the organization and go and do something else, right? You're looking to go off to graduate school and they may not be thrilled by the idea of you leaving the team. And, I often speak with candidates who are thinking of asking other recommenders because they're nervous about having that conversation with their boss and they're afraid that, it will jeopardize their position in the organization, that their boss may not be supportive because they don't want them to leave. But I would encourage candidates to really think hard before going elsewhere and avoiding your current supervisor, because from the school's perspective, in most cases, that's the ideal recommendation to get is your current supervisor. And what I've seen working with clients is that, it often is a difficult conversation to have, but in the vast majority of cases, candidates are pleasantly surprised that their boss actually, genuinely has their own interest, the candidate's interest at heart, and wants to support them on that path and understands that they have, longer term ambitions and wants to, help them achieve that. And therefore, will be thrilled to write a recommendation for them. So I would encourage candidates to, have that difficult conversation if at all possible. Sometimes other mistakes that I see candidates make is picking a recommender that is a peer or an academic recommendation. It's really, will not carry as much weight as someone who's actually supervised you. So the ideal scenario is, current boss and a former boss. And ideally not going back too far in history. I would say sort of the last 3 to 4 years is a good sort of time frame for when you would have worked with that recommender, and perhaps, the last couple of years, and one being current. And also, I think it's important to make sure that you pick people who are genuinely going to be your champion. And, one way that you can gauge that is how you approach them. So I suggest that candidates, when thinking about, having a conversation, perhaps you're approaching a former boss or your current boss and asking them to write your recommendation. Don't ask them, will you write my recommendation? Ask them, will you be my advocate in this process, right? And see how they react. See if they sort of, react warmly, if they are ready to step up and they really want to help you, or if they're a little bit more guarded in their response. And maybe it will take a couple of conversations, but you want to be absolutely sure that they are going to, be absolute out and out champions for you. And another issue that I've seen when I was working at INSEAD and reading applications is that sometimes candidates unfortunately had misjudged that, right? And sometimes the candidate had a wonderful application, but they had just asked the wrong person and they hadn't understood that recommender, wasn't fully engaged in the process, or perhaps the recommender just didn't understand what was expected of them. And it can really, it's just so sad for an admissions committee or an admissions director to have to turn someone away when you see, actually, this is a great candidate, but the recommender has really torpedoed this application and we can't move forward because of that. So make sure that, you have conversations, you know that they're going to be your champion, and then coach them through the process. And we'll come back to this on the session next week, and we'll talk more in detail about, how to coach your recommenders. But that's a very important part of the process for you to do. Just don't assume that they know exactly what is expected of them, and don't assume that they know exactly what to write. You don't want to write it for them, but you do want to sort of accompany them through the process.
So just for clarity, it's being your advocate rather than your avocado. I want to make sure that I do that properly. And perhaps, Karla, you've seen so many circumstances, people saying, oh, I can have a political leader from the G20 that writes on my behalf, or, the CEO of benefactors to the school, even the popularity contest of dozens of alum reaching out to the schools. Those things can be counterproductive or fail, I guess, to show what Caroline was describing, the sort of close, substantive, insightful letters that the schools are really looking for. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I remember, and I regret to say that there was some laughter around the issue, but when we received a letter of recommendation from a world leader, and it was obvious that this world leader did not know the candidate at all, and probably didn't even write it himself. You want individuals, I always look at the lens of like, who's going to be very enthusiastic and detailed. So exactly as Caroline said, phrasing it as like, are you going to advocate for me? Do you feel comfortable writing me a very strong letter of recommendation? Because that's what it's going to take. And in fact, when I do the dig analysis for a lot of my clients who have otherwise stellar test scores, stories, essays, and then it's like, can I get a look at the letters of recommendation? And they're usually very lackluster. So it's really about, the lens is like, who's going to be able to speak with credibility, number one, who has a close vantage point as to what I'm doing. And so as Caroline mentioned, that's often your direct supervisor. That's the ideal, because they're going to be responsible and they're going to be in charge of conducting theoretically your performance reviews, if that's something that your company does. And so they'll have a lot of insight into the things that make you successful. They'll be able to highlight habits and patterns with detail, because the admissions committee does not want to see just a laundry list of adjectives. If you are best friends and work day to day with the CEO, it's not bad to have the CEO write it. So it's not, I don't look at it as like, what is the title or how important this is. If you are, best friends with Justin Trudeau, then go for it. If you work directly for him, yes, but most people don't. And I think they over-index on the power of the title, when really what they want to see is substance. They want to see evidence, and also with feedback. Has this person given you feedback? Almost every business school, with the exception of Wharton in the top programs, I think, asks about a time, what is the most important feedback that you've given this candidate? So also think about the questions that they're going to be asked, and have they ever given you feedback that has been important? And you also don't want it to be feedback that is, I told them to improve their work-life balance, or I told them to stop being a perfectionist. Those are overdone. You want it to be specific and detailed and meaty. But I know we're running short on time, so I'll wrap this up. But I think it depends on your situation. And I do think that it depends on, there could be a variety of individuals. Letters of recommendation oftentimes are not the things that get you in, but they absolutely keep you out. So it's such a critical part of the process. and thinking through the different options. I think most of my clients end up being surprised when we go through the landscape of who do we pick and choose to support your application and what's going to be optimal for you. There may be a variety of options that are great, but I'll try and think through like, okay, based on your story and your experience, what is going to actually support your application in the best possible way to convert this to an interview and then hopefully an offer. And it's complicated, but I do think that the rule of thumb of, someone who's currently supervising you, your boss's boss, could be a powerful combo, or a current boss and a former boss, to show like a broad spectrum of what you've been through can be great too. If you don't have any direct supervisory insights or support, that is a red flag. Why has no one that you've worked for decided that they feel strongly about your potential to do well in business school? So that can be a curious and not in a good way part of your application. So I'll close with that.
Well, I did promise everyone that next Tuesday we'll be having another session that looks in depth at recommendations. What about the entrepreneur? Who do they turn to? I was once in an airport, Karla, that Justin Trudeau had probably flown through about 15 months earlier. There was an energy in the waiting room, I swear.
I believe it.
You make some great comments about things that are lackluster. They just don't have the detail. Now, there's a lot to pull together, and everything that we've implied this evening is about getting the ball rolling, having those conversations, being somebody's advocate. So I'm going to turn to Julia just to pull some of these strands together. We started the discussion with in today's webinar about a timeline. Is there an ideal timeline, Julia?
I think, again, as we've touched on more than once, we're so glad those who are online today are going to be watching this, as we're sitting start of the third week of April. This is a great time to be doing it. And because I think what it kind of allows you to do, let's say I know we're focused on round one applications. So we're just under 5 months out from many of those deadlines. So these next 6 weeks or so, as you get up to from now to the end of May, is the perfect time to be doing that research, that reflection, and then at the parallel path of prep, which is mainly the test prep, and really getting that going. So research, reflect, research, prep. So then come July or June 1, you're ready, you've sort of narrowed down your choice of schools, maybe you've engaged with a few of them, but you're ready to start the application in earnest. And I would also recommend, actually, it's an article, Matt, that you wrote about 2 years ago this time in Forbes, but that if you give yourself enough time like this, you can actually enjoy the process. And, there are times of, you can't deny it, acute stress in the application process. It also should be fun and it should be energizing. And this is something, it's this critical life choice you're going to make, and investment in yourself, that if you can sort of go into it with a clear head in some ways and not feel rushed about it, that you will be far more likely to sort of find that perfect fit and make the best case possible for your admissions package.
Well, working with the three of you, it is fun, it is energizing. And I really hold to this idea. What a wonderful opportunity to apply to business school, to step back, hold up that mirror. Everything that the three of you have shared, I think, in the last 60, 65 minutes. Perhaps, Caroline, just a final word from you with everything that we're pulling together and all of the resources that we're going to share with candidates. Just this idea of, what we're pulling together as we look at September deadlines. Any pitfalls or final guidance that you would offer?
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of break it down into bite-sized pieces, because it can be quite an intimidating process. There's a lot of steps, right, to go through between the testing and pulling together all the different written parts of the application. Some schools have video questions as well. Doing all of that research that we talked about. So that there is a lot to do, and it is challenging for most candidates to juggle this alongside, in most cases, they have a very demanding day job. So I would suggest, as Julia said, mapping that out and sort of breaking it down into bite-sized pieces so that you don't get overwhelmed, because, as admissions director, I did often see applications from people where you could see, the raw material here is great, but they've thrown it together at the last minute, and they just don't compare well to other people who have, given more time and thought to the process. Or maybe they've done part of the application really well, but something has been often an issue is they spent a lot of time on their essays, and the essays are absolutely beautiful, but the application form was sort of thrown together at the last minute, and they've put their date of birth as today's date or something, where they clearly just haven't paid attention to some of the details, and it just it can look sloppy, right? So just don't put yourself in that position where it's a few days before the deadline and you've got some critical elements still outstanding. It's wonderful that you're starting to think about planning your round one applications now, so take advantage of that time to prepare yourself really well, knowing that not all of your competition will be doing that, right? So some people will be submitting applications and throwing it together at the last minute. So you have a competitive advantage right here is giving some really thoughtful and dedicated time to this process.
Right. I ask admissions directors of the top schools, how can we best use the coming months and time? It's very old school. They say, this is a notepad. This is a pen. Well, actually, this isn't a pen. This is a paintbrush, but that's what happens when an eight-year-old living at home. But it's keep this by your bedside. And if, the sort of things that three of you have been discussing, note it down. If you want to be very modern about it, with that watch of yours as you go jogging in the park, you can record a message and then remind yourself of that moment of clarity that you had. But it is an ongoing and iterative process. So this is the first of several workshops, because of course, how can I fit all of your expertise and insights into just 60 minutes? We'll be looking in much more detail next week. We said, resumes, applications, letters of recommendation, and subsequent sessions that really dive into the essays. Now, I've tried as best we could with around 50 questions coming in to answer many of them. Some will actually send you articles. Somebody said, okay, if I'm over 30 and applying to business school, we wrote a piece that was read by 250,000 people about over 30s applying to business school. Lots of other advice, of course, on the Fortuna website. So we will get to the questions. We didn't get to all of them in this session. But I do want to finish thanking a lot of people, starting with the panelists. As you can see, they bring incredible enthusiasm and insight. These are the people that are by your side, that are holding up that mirror and asking these questions of you to really push, to dig a little bit deeper and to really make a difference when you put together those applications. As I say, it is a joy to work with Caroline, with Karla, with Julia. And thanks to all of you for following us. Now, whether you've stayed with us for the last 60 minutes or you've caught this on YouTube, reach out. We've only just started to scratch the surface on all of the different things that you can do to put together your applications for round one. Find us on Fortuna's website, sign up for a free consultation. We will take the time, we will have reviewed your profile to really look at your individual story. And then don't forget, next week, Tuesday, same time, we'll be diving into those recommendations, resume and application forms. But to my three panelists, thank you for your time. It was a great session. I really enjoyed it. I always learn something from each of you.